one of the ways that the South Asian community or religious communities or whatever other communities might do to try and silence or hurt or change you is to say you don't exist. That, South Asian gay people don't exist. South Asian trans people don't exist. Like those two things are incompatible. It's just not true. And this podcast is testament to the fact that South Asian queer people, actually, there is a community there. Just your existence needs to be named and honored. That's a really important thing. Don't let any community tell you that your identity as South Asian and queer is not real.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Under the Brown Rainbow, where South Asian queer stories come to life. I'm your host, Kashif Harrison. I'm a queer performer and presenter. We are almost to the end of the finish line, with our final episodes to go for this season. Thank you so much for subscribing, downloading, and sharing this podcast. If this podcast has resonated with you or someone you know, please do reach out to us and share with us via email or socials. And to support us further, please leave us a review on whichever platform you listen to us on. Allyship is vital for the LGBTQI+ community. More so for the South Asians. Offering support, visibility, and advocacy in a world where discrimination persists is so important. Allies amplify LGBTQI+ voices, foster safe, inclusive spaces, and provide critical emotional and practical support for those facing isolation or rejection. In this episode, I'm sitting down with minister and team leader Reverend Radhika Sukumar-White of Leichhardt Uniting Church in Sydney, Australia, to discuss the importance of leading with faith in allyship. Reverend Radhika is a second-generation Sri Lankan Tamil Australian and grew up in Canberra before moving to Sydney to study physiotherapy, music, and then theology. Radhika is passionate about leading vibrant worship, preaching and teaching, and walking alongside individuals in their life and faith journey. We discuss how, as a South Asian leader, Radhika's ministry at the Leichhardt Uniting Church is creating a safe space for the LGBTQI+ community, and her advice on LGBTQI+ individuals seeking acceptance in faith communities. It's one of those special episodes I can't wait to dive in. But before I do go ahead, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast channel. Follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast from. To support us, please leave a review on whichever platform you're listening to us on. It will help us with awareness of this podcast. Follow us on Instagram at Under the Brown Rainbow. For now, this is Reverend Radhika Sukumar-White of Leichhardt Uniting Church, Under the Brown Rainbow. Welcome to Under the Brown Rainbow, where South Asian queer stories come to life. I'm your host Kashif, and this podcast is proudly presented by Trikone Australia. In each episode, we dive into the diverse and often unheard narratives of the South Asian LGBTQI+ community, celebrating love, identity, and resilience. So my dears and my queers, join us as we honor the stories that shine brightly under the brown rainbow. First of all, can I just say a huge welcome, Reverend Radhika, to this podcast. I think that sometimes it's just meant to be. And this is one of those episodes I feel that was meant to be. And I'm so happy that I'm sitting here talking to you under this brown rainbow. I hope that you feel invited.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so excited to talk about all the work that you do through your church, through your ministry, but also just being yourself. Can I just say you're a very calm figure? Okay, so whenever I talk about, or whenever we see you in church, or even outside of church, there's a very calmness around you, and that's very I feel appealing, but also at the same time very nourishing, soothing, and it just feels like anyone I feel can open up to you. And I don't know if this
I hope so. That's very sweet of you to say. I hope that's the case. But I have duck energy in that I up here, like it's all calm and welcoming and whatever, but I'm like paddling hard underneath to make sure, it's all okay.
Well, you're doing such phenomenal work. And I think that through
Thanks,
Leichhardt
babe.
Uniting Church, I just feel like, it's a story to tell. And that's what we're doing today. So now can I ask you, so you're a great ally. And I feel when I talk about allyship, I see that the kind of allyship that we require from people is not just, hey, it's okay, I'm standing with you side by side. No, we're talking about actions. We're talking about words. We're talking about connection and then also leadership. So my first question going out to you is that what does allyship mean to you as a faith leader with a South Asian background?
It's a really good first question. I think there's two parts to that, right? Being a South Asian and being a queer ally. I am a Sri Lankan Tamil Australian. My parents are from the north of Sri Lanka in Jaffna. They grew up there and then migrated here just before the Civil War sort of erupted. So they've been in Australia longer than they were in Sri Lanka. And we were very connected with the Sri Lankan Tamil community in Canberra when I grew up down there in the 90s and 2000s. And that diaspora community had a really strong connection to each other. I would say maybe 80% of that community were Hindu, but conversations around sexuality were really non-existent. There was sort of offhanded comments made about someone's sort of femininity or a young girl or whatever dressing manly or whatever, and that being sort of funny. And I think when my parents' generation talked about people who were maybe gay, they didn't used language like that at all. They were sort of, it was sort of almost joking as opposed to naming someone as potentially not heterosexual or not cisgender or whatever. So that was what I grew up with as a South Asian person. And then people in my community started to come out. People of my generation started to come out as gay, and some of them were really excommunicated, really treated badly, really teased, or their parents were seen as failing as parents because, their kids had adopted these Western gay ways or whatever. Or they had some like affirmation from their family, but then the family was then teased. Like the parents were not treated well in the community because they didn't, bring them back to the straight and narrow. So that's the South Asian part of me. I've grown up in the Uniting Church in Australia my whole life. My family is all Christian. And the Uniting Church in the Australian landscape, I would say, is on the more progressive end in terms of Australian denominations. So it's a very diverse church across the country. There are some churches that are on the more conservative end and some that are really far more progressive. But generally speaking, the Uniting Church does things like talk about asylum seeker policy and talk about climate change and talk about Palestine and we have a full equality of women and men in leadership and that kind of stuff, which by church standards is fairly progressive, right? So the Uniting Church is all that I've known. And I think I grew into allyship being in a progressive congregation when I was a child and seeing queer couples sit fairly comfortably in the congregation and just going, well, that's good. And I didn't realize it was controversial until I moved to Sydney and experienced other situations. And then becoming minister and senior minister at Leichhardt Uniting Church, where it was openly and publicly queer affirming, and which was totally fine to me. And so for me, figuring out how to be a cisgender and straight advocate and safe person with these people who most of whom had been hurt by the church before was how I learnt allyship. Like I learnt it from them, to be honest. So for me, as you said, allyship is about visibility. Not just quietly going like, you're fine with me, you can be gay around me, but to sort of openly in the streets talk about standing alongside and shoulder to shoulder with queer people. So it's visibility and it's vocal and public and it's unapologetic, I guess. I think it's a big part of allyship is recognizing I have nothing to lose by standing alongside people who have so much to gain. So why wouldn't I use the privileges that I have as a cisgender and straight person to be an ally? Because I lose nothing, other people gain more. That's allyship for me.
That is just so beautiful. And you know what? When you were just talking about that, Radhika, I feel like obviously everyone's like, mesmerized by the Glinda and Elphaba, the Wicked theme, and the journey of it. And I feel I've never watched the musical when it came out 21 years ago. And then now watching the movie, I can see why queer people actually feel so emotional about it, because it is just like that. Because I feel in a way they see an ally in Glinda, and they see themselves in Elphaba. And I feel like some way or the other, it's just like that, maybe going in my mind at the back, Can I just say that growing up in a very conservative Christian family of my own, we were, all the time when I used to have these, thoughts of being gay, I used to make these little notes with God promises that, hey, if you do this for me, I will stop being gay. If you do that for me, I'll stop being gay. I mean, I'm pretty sure even God knew that, he was just, I know that. I know that.
Yeah.
I think in our community, I feel like a lot of such queer people, especially when we talk about South Asian community, we have so many restricted or very conservative cultures, and then very conservative cultures make very conservative religions. Like, you can't have a gay marriage in any of the religions, really. And that was such a
yes.
such a big taboo back in the days. And you can't be even seen with a boy holding hands if you're, let's say a Hindu, or even if you're, let's say a Christian or any other religion. But now it's opening up. Now the doors are opening up. But there's still a majority of the community out there which still think that, what, being queer is not acceptable in a religion.
Absolutely. And I think the diaspora question, the diaspora complexity adds more to that. So I think more so in the diaspora than in the whatever the motherland is, there is a growing conservatism, like 50 years ago kind of conservatism, that says there's no such thing as a queer South Asian. If you're South Asian, the queer is a Western woke concept. We know that biologically we were created male and female, or whatever it might be. In Hinduism, that's the case, and whatever, which is not true. Plenty of homosexuality in Hinduism. There's plenty of homoerotic stuff in the Bible. Like, that's all very real, right? But the conservatism of the diaspora is so strong. And that's true of many, many, many cultures. And so in India and Sri Lanka and Pakistan and whatever, you're right, there is a growing sense of modernity and a growing awareness. Sure, homosexuality exists, transgenderism exists, like, it's real, and there's more respect for it. But I think it feels like in the diaspora, we're a long way behind.
And you're right. I mean, now I see so many queer subjects being raised and made in places like Pakistan. I've never seen that before. Right? It's huge.
It's massive.
Now, can I ask that? So what is, as a faith leader like yourself, what advice would you give to other faith leaders who want to practice allyship, but they do fear that backlash?
So as a Christian in a uniting church, one of the tools that I use that I think can transcend religion is something that is called the Wesleyan quadrilateral. It was named after John Wesley, who's the father of Methodism. Anyway, he didn't necessarily write this down, but it's his way of thinking. He says the way to think about controversial topics, there's 4 things to think about. Quadrilateral. 1 is scripture, 1 is tradition, 1 is reason, and 1 is experience. That's the 4 sides. And I think regardless of whatever faith you are in, I think that's probably still true. Whatever the scriptures say to you, whatever tradition says to you, whatever science and logic and reason says to you, and then what experience says to you. Now, it could well be that scripture, regardless of faith, generally doesn't have great things to say about sexual difference or gender difference or whatever. And tradition doesn't do us many, many favors, except to recognize queer people have always existed. Like, it's silly to say otherwise. Logic and reason, you can absolutely, show that sexuality is real. You can see it's not really even a choice. It's just a thing. It's just a part of the human spectrum. And then experience is, I think, what changes people into allies. So for me, the biggest thing that made me want to use my voice for good in that space was meeting a queer couple in my congregation who had been together for a long time, who were effectively de facto married, but were waiting for marriage equality, who loved each other so much and loved Jesus so much. And neither of those things were mutually exclusive. And that experience of getting to know them and recognizing their relationship was so beautiful and real was the experience that made me understand in one of the ways that I live out being a Christian is by being an ally. So I think that's true also of Hindu faith leaders or Buddhist faith leaders or Muslim faith leaders or whatever. Yes, your scriptures matter. Yes, tradition matters. Look at logic and reason too, and then meet people who are queer. Get to know them on a real deep level and understand them to be not just issues and not just sinners or whatever, but flesh and blood people. Often that'll make the world a difference.
Can I just say that, it's so nice to hear those words now. And I remember that I feel in the 80s or 90s, these words would be even like, it would be blasphemy, you know? And now it's not. Now it's more generous. Now it's more kind. Now it's more, hey, this is the logical way to go. And I feel like the reaffirmation that your parents or your family has when you're like, hey, listen, my sexual orientation is my business, but I still believe in, the creator. I still value our culture. I still value my family. And to say that out to family is really hard sometimes without a support network like what Leichhardt Uniting Church and your ministry is doing. And I think that's the beauty of allyship, why allyship becomes such a phenomenal thing. I'm literally, losing words here because I'm so excited about this. I'm so excited to say that this is truly what a good allyship should look like, feel like, and should be visioned like.
I think that's true. I think one of the things that I have struggled with is being an ally and being quite proud to stand alongside, but also not wanting to take the microphone away or the stage away from actual queer people who, it's not about me. There have been times where I've been asked to do things or say things or, speak at rallies or whatever. And I've been really uncomfortable about, I'm not actually in that umbrella. Should I not be stepping aside, stage left, in order to make space for queer people to bring their voice in? As there has been a growing kindness around queerness, there has been a growing awareness that allyship actually helps things move forward, that queer people have been fighting so hard forever, particularly in the last century. It's not that they can't do it alone, but it is strengthened by allies working side by side with them.
It is absolutely true. Can I ask that, what are some practical steps you've taken to make church a safe space for everyone? Because I can imagine the amount of challenges you might also face, even though it's a very progressive ministry, but people still outside the box will be seeing you and they will be judging you. So how do you deal with that? And what are the steps that you take to still make it a safe space for the community that you've built in?
It is interesting that at Leichhardt, we came 2 years after the marriage plebiscite, where the congregation copped a fair bit of hate online and via posts and stuff for the signboards they put up or the things that they would say and do. And then marriage equality passed. And we inherited a congregation who knew exactly what they were standing for. And there is almost a homogeneity in the congregation because we're so publicly and verbally and in everything that we say and do affirming. There's kind of no question that if you're in this congregation, you're going to be affirming of queer people or an ally of queer people. So there hasn't been so much internal work that my husband and I have had to do in the congregation to move the congregation towards being safe. On the other hand, in the last 6 years that we've been there, I think the biggest learning is how the congregation can be trauma-informed, because so many of the queer people in our congregation carry with them quite significant spiritual or emotional trauma from other faith or church spaces. And part of our work in being a safe place for whoever is to be trauma-informed in our practices, whether that's in preaching or our building. So we do things like we offer trigger warnings in sermons. We always have pastoral care on hand. There's things like anyone who leads something in a church service has the opportunity to name their pronouns, whether or not they are cisgender, in order to make space for people who are not cisgender to feel like their pronouns are going to be respected and matter. We have a fairly significantly sized pride flag at the front of our church that says "You are loved." And again, that visibility is really important. And it doesn't cost me anything, because I know I believe I'm loved, but having that rainbow visibility at the front of the church matters to other people. It's the trauma-informed practices that I think we're growing in more than figuring out how our church can be affirming, because we just are. It's like it's in our bricks. It's just there.
My experience of coming to the church for the first time was this. I saw the pride flag hanging around at the front, and I was like, oh, I've never seen this before. Hey, listen.
This is new. Yeah.
Exactly. This is new.
Yeah.
I've been in Australia for quite some time now. Pakistani background, I've always ended up dating atheist people and never found a Christian man. Now, finally, I got a Christian man who's taking me to church. And this church is actually having pride flag on top of it. I mean, what's going on here? And then
you don't have to not hold hands at church or, whatever. You can just be you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we do that. And I think that's the best part, because it was such a culture shock for me in a way. But then I understood why this is so important. And all those prayers, and especially for my partner, Daniel, he loves and adores the services, but also he believes in this progressive church so much, and the way this religion being this progressive and accepting, that's the message that we believe in, for sure.
I agree. And I think one of the things that Leichhardt tries to do is we endeavor to be a safe place for queer people, but that's not the only thing that we are, right? There are absolutely church spaces that whose sole identity is being safe and kind of comfortable for queer people. And that absolutely is a ministry need. It's a good thing, particularly for Generation X or older queer people who have, lived through the HIV stuff and all that kind of stuff. All they can handle is just safety. And Leichhardt, we're saying we are fully affirming of who you are. We will utterly respect you exactly as you are. Now let's talk about you following Jesus. And the hope is that once people recognize that they don't have to hide their sexuality or change their sexuality or change their gender or anything like that, they're free then to go, oh, I want to be part of this thing. I want to be part of this movement. I want to learn about what it means to follow Jesus in my life. That's the goal for us, rather than just having people be safe.
And it's very interesting you brought this up, because my next question was this, that how do you engage, people, especially who feel disconnected to faith due to past experiences and exclusion from the communities, just based on the fact that, they've just decided to accept who they are, and getting them in. How does that work?
Yeah, it's different. There's not really a hard and fast rule. And I wouldn't say that my next response will be rocket science in any way. One of the big things that works well is as people enter the church for the first time, I will meet them and I'll make a time for coffee with them in the next week. Like, my goal is to kind of connect with people soon. And then I invite them gently to hear some of their story, and inevitably part of their story includes, and then I came out as, or I'm wrestling with who I am, or whatever. And for me, if my posture can be, all right, or I'm really sorry that you experienced that, I'm safe. I promise you I'm safe. You are beloved just as you are. Either people will go, oh, thank God, and then they're more relaxed and they feel more excited about engaging. Or because of the trauma that they've experienced, they go, no, what's the catch here? This isn't real. Like, something's going to give at some point, because this surely cannot be the case. And sometimes I cannot prove them wrong. Like, that sometimes there are people who are so hurt and so burnt that they cannot wrap their head around a space that is genuinely a safe faith space for them. And for that, it's okay, because the best I can do is to love them hard for as long as I have them. And if they choose to leave, it's okay. I want to hold them gently. Trauma is a bastard of a thing. Like, it can really hurt people for the rest of their lives. And therapy is an absolute gift, and being in community is an absolute gift, but trauma can really mess with people's ability to receive good things. And there's not much, I'm not a therapist and I'm not a counselor, and I can't do that work for them necessarily. All I can do, as you said, is be an ally and be safe. So that first coffee conversation, I think, is really, really important. Connecting, say, trans people with other trans people in the congregation, or queer couples with other queer couples in the congregation. So again, they don't feel like the only gay in the village, not that they ever would at Leichhardt, is really important. And then gently finding ways for them to be at the front and lead, because often in their past church experiences, they've been told, as long as you're gay, you don't get to be at the front. That permission giving and empowering and stuff is really important.
Wow. The more I talk to you about it, the more I get that such an important message right here is allyship with a great leadership vision. And I think this is exactly what's happening here. Because like you said, sometimes, especially if you've gone through that trauma of being excluded from the society and everything, just because, of accepting yourself, we do tend to have trust issues, a lot of trust issues, especially with the community religious leaders, the scholars.
Yes.
Because we're always like, okay, what's going on? Am I going to be bashed later, mentally or emotionally? And, you're right. And that takes a lot out of you. But when you talk about, hey, I'm open to talk, that door is open, we do feel comfortable.
I think so. And that suspicion can come inside the church and outside the church. Within the church, there are people who I've experienced who are almost waiting for me to slip up and not be as affirming as I say I am. As if to say, see, I told you there'd be a catch here. I'm waiting for you to prove me wrong, right? And then there are people outside the church who would say, oh, you're only affirming to be woke, or you're only affirming to get more bums on seats or whatever. And I think that suspicion is also, you're not actually being loving, surely. There's a real human sense of, there's a catch here, surely. Surely no one can be that safe or that affirming or whatever. And that really stems from their own vulnerabilities and their own fears and baggage and trauma and stuff.
Yeah, although they don't understand that this process is also so healing. Once you finally believe and finally say, hey, okay, I've got issues, I've got trust issues, but let's get into this. Let's see where this goes. And
Yeah.
once you go in, it definitely becomes a healing process for you to understand that, hey, I'm accepted no matter what. It becomes really important for people who haven't been accepted by their own family and be accepted by a community leader like this, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah, a lot of our congregation talk about chosen family because their biological family has kind of left them behind.
Speaking of family and speaking of leadership, there's a lot that you're juggling over here. Let's just be honest, okay? So you're a spiritual leader, but also you're an ally, you're a social advocate. How do you juggle all of that? What's the balance and how do you balance it?
I don't know that I do balance it very well, but I take the opportunities that are before me and think about how will this honor God? How will this flourish the congregation? And am I holding full integrity by doing whatever is required of me? So I don't know that there's a strategic plan necessarily, like for me personally. And there have been times if I felt some burnout that I've kind of gone, I'm going to have to say no this time because I don't have my tank is now empty. My tank is there's not much in there. I think a big part of what has worked well at Leichhardt Uniting Church in the last 6 years is me being a public ally in the streets. So Mardi Gras and speaking at rallies and public statements and social media campaigns and that kind of stuff. That has been really important to the congregation. And sometimes that's been costly, but I've generally been very happy to do that. I want to be sure that our congregation doesn't just talk about queer allyship, that we do also talk about climate change and Palestine and Indigenous stuff and whatever, because the world has a lot to do to get towards justice in very many aspects of the world, right? The stuff around queerness is really important, but it's not the only thing as well.
And you're right. I mean, you know, with all this talk about Palestine, I don't think that I have ever seen a church starting their mass by lighting a candle just for Palestine. I thought that was very, very encouraging, but also very affirming for those who come from these communities, like who are Egyptian, who are, you know, Lebanese and stuff.
Yes, yeah.
There's a lot more in this world, and bit by bit by bit, I think if we keep on addressing each thing, the world's going to be a beautiful place.
Agreed.
Yeah. Now, you know, almost out of time. So my last question is definitely now about an advice that what would you advise or what would your advice be for fellow South Asian LGBTQI plus individuals seeking acceptance in faith communities? What do you think you would like to tell them that makes them feel, okay, maybe I can start this conversation with someone. Maybe I can find an ally within my community as well who wants to support me or who wants to maybe start something like build a community like this. What would your advice be there?
One of the things that I would say is that one of the ways that the South Asian community or religious communities or whatever other communities might do to try and silence or hurt or change you is to say you don't exist. That, you know, South Asian gay people don't exist. South Asian trans people don't exist. Like those two things are incompatible. The first piece of advice that I would say is bullshit to that. It's just not true. And this podcast is testament to the fact that South Asian queer people, actually, there is a community there. Just your existence needs to be named and honored. That's a really important thing. Don't let any community tell you that your identity as South Asian and queer is not real, because that's what many cultures have done in the past to try and silence minorities, and it never really works because we do exist. And I say this as a Sri Lankan Tamil who endured a full civil war and stuff. Like, silencing is a thing that humans do, but it's not okay. In order to find safety in faith spaces where you are also not of the majority white cultural demographic, I think there is great wisdom in seeking out spaces not just that are safe and queer affirming, but that are relatively multicultural. So that conversation is also about intersectionality, and the conversation is also about different parts of demographics sort of existing side by side. So for example, Leichhardt Uniting Church, we're close to the CBD. A lot of our congregation are second generation people from a variety of backgrounds who are relearning the language of their parents and grandparents as a way to educate themselves. It's a good place for a queer South Asian person to be, because they would not be the only queer South Asian person there, or there you're the only queer brown person there. There's strength in numbers there. And I guess the last thing I'd say is your faith, if you are someone of faith and you're looking for a space that you can, be in a faith community and be queer, your faith doesn't belong to that demographic. Your faith doesn't belong to that church or temple or mosque or wherever you might. So if you're not feeling welcome or safe where you are, leave them. It's okay. Churches, they don't own you. Your faith is your own. So go to a place where you're going to be safe and welcome and encouraged to love God and serve the world. There are places out there. There are. Even if you have to move from meeting face to face to finding an online community, spaces are out there for you. Church does not own your faith, or places of worship do not own your faith.
Most of the times we do believe that, our religion is what defines us, but let's just be real. Culture, there's a whole lot of things, and you're not bound to cage yourself just because the people who teach religion tell you to do so. Well, on that note, Radhika, thank you so much. It was beautiful having you on this podcast. And I know that this happened in such a hurry, but it was all meant to be. And I believe this is exactly what the gods decided. You know what? That we are going to be talking about allyship, leadership, spirituality under the brown rainbow.
Thank you, Kashif, for the work you do for this podcast and for your work in visibility as well. You're doing amazing things for the brown community.
Oh, thank you so much. Now, I won't let you go like this. Before letting you go, I just found out that even Leichhardt Uniting Church has a podcast. Like, hello.
Yes.
We're podcast buddies now. So what's that podcast
We are.
about?
We haven't released anything in the last few months just because we've got too much on our plate, but it's called As Luck Would Have It because we love a good pun. As Luck Would Have It, you can find it on any of your podcast platforms, and it's a series of lots of different things, interviews and sermons and whatever from Leichhardt Uniting Church, mainly not me, mainly people within the congregation. So we hope to release some more episodes next year in 2025, so subscribe.
There you have it, guys. Thank you so much, Radhika, again, for coming to the show, coming to this podcast and sharing your wisdom and being the great ally that you are.
Thanks, Kashif. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us on Under the Brown Rainbow, which is proudly presented by Tricone Australia. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast and share it with your family, friends, and allies. Follow us on social media and feel free to reach out with your own stories. This is Kashif signing off. Until next time, my dears and my queers, keep shining brightly under the brown rainbow.